The time is 11:30 p.m. Lights are switched off in the first-class lounge. Up in the crow's nest, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee see haze in the distance, but they aren't sure why it's there in the first place. Then at 11:39, Fleet spots something in the distance darker than the surroundings. It's a blackbird. He rings the nest bell 3 times and then telephones the bridge. Then it goes something like this. Sixth Officer James Moody picks up the phone. Fleet asks, "Is anyone there?" Moody replies, "Yes, what do you see?" Fleet gives his historic reply, "Iceberg right ahead," to which Moody replies, "Thank you," and hangs up. "Iceberg right ahead, sir," shouts Moody, and Mr. Murdoch rushes onto the bridge and gives the order hard a starboard. Then he rings the engine order telegraph to stop, while Moody supervises as Quartermaster Robert Hitchens begins turning the ship to port. But it's too late. The iceberg scrapes along the Titanic's bow on starboard side. At 11:40, Mr. Murdoch orders the helm hard aport and shuts the watertight doors from the bridge. Murdoch was basically planning to port around the iceberg, first by turning the helm hard towards port and then hard towards the starboard to prevent damage to the bow and stern sections respectively. And it's worth mentioning that tiller commands in 1912 were the opposite of what they are today. Either way, the damage was done. The hard aport maneuver managed to save the stern from damage, but the bow section was damaged on the starboard side. The damage was from the forepeak tank all the way to boiler room number 5, and it was caused by rivets popping out and the hull plates buckling. Previously, it was believed that the iceberg tore a 90-meter-long gash in the hull, but now we know it was an interrupted series of 6 gashes of varying lengths. In fact, here's the diagram which shows us the locations and size of all these gashes. At 11:41, Captain Smith arrives on the bridge, and having felt the engines stop, he asks Mr. Murdoch, "What happened?" "An iceberg, sir," Murdoch explains. "I tried to port around it, but it was too late." Then Captain Smith goes out to the starboard wing of bridge and tries to locate the iceberg which they have steamed past. At 11:42, 4th Officer Boxhall enters our story. Boxhall was making tea in his cabin when he heard the lookout fleet ringing the nest's bell. Some historians, including Captain David Brown, believe in fact he was coming from the bathroom at this time and then he used the tea to cover up this. But we know later on that after Boxhall was rescued, he fell ill with pleurisy to the point they had to admit him to hospital in New York. So it does make sense that he was making tea for himself during his watch simply because he was feeling sick. But either way, after hearing the collision on his own, Boxhall decided to go down as low as he could without getting into the cargo areas and reach the F deck. He said that he remembered all the portholes in the vicinity were closed, and he recalled this was under the forecastle, and in this area he saw no signs of flooding or damage. He came up through the same route, and a man with some ice in his hands was there. He said the ice was the size of small basin or coats, very small anyhow. Then he walked across the deck to see where this man got this ice from, and he saw that on the front well deck there was some ice, nearly 3 to 4 feet around the bulwarks of the ship. But he said it was, from his perspective, just little ice. And in 1962, he said he remembered seeing powdered ice on the along the railings as well. At 11:43, the engines are started half ahead, and this is something a number of survivors later recalled. Though they said the engines weren't operating as fast as before, but we don't exactly know why this happened because, you see, Mr. Ismay hadn't arrived on the bridge yet, so this definitely wasn't his request. Around 11:44 or 45, Mr. Andrews is inquired by a number of first-class passengers on the promenade deck about what's happening. He assures them it's all fine, and then he leaves, likely headed to the bridge to speak with the captain. In the forepeak section, lamp trimmer Samuel Hemming and storekeeper Frank Prentice hear a curious hissing sound. They decide to investigate where it's coming from and they climb the tank top, but they find no damage. However, they discover that the sound is coming from the vent pipe as the water rushes into the tank below, displacing the air. Bosun's mate Albert Haynes and Chief Officer Wilde arrive at the scene, and once they learn of this, Wilde hurries off to inform the captain. Between 11:45 and 11:46, Quartermaster Hitchens notices that the ship is listing 5 degrees to starboard, and he informs the captain about it, who takes note. The bridge telegraphs the engine room stop, and the Titanic's engines stop for the final time. This was possibly done as per Mr. Andrews' advice if he indeed went to the bridge from A deck. Mr. Ismay arrives on the bridge and Captain Smith tells him, "We have struck ice." "Is it serious?" he asks, to which Smith replies, "I'm afraid it is." Mr. Ismay leaves for his stateroom, and if his claims were correct, he did not see Mr. Andrews on the bridge, which suggests that Mr. Andrews was only there for a short time, if he actually went there in the first place. Below in the boiler rooms, steam begins to accumulate because the engines have stopped, and once the steam reaches the pressure close to dangerous limits, the safety valves on the 24 double-ended boilers are released, venting steam from the funnels. This steam disturbs communications on the boat deck to the point crew is forced to use hand signals for communication. And occasionally the radio operator Jack Phillips replies to other ships that "I can't hear you" because of the steam. The steam will continue to be vented till at least 1:05 a.m. according to survivors. At 11:50, Boxall arrives on the bridge and tells the captain he has seen no damage. Captain Smith tells him to go and find the ship's carpenter and order him to sound the ship. To sound the ship means inspect the ship for damage. On his way to the carpenter's cabin located at E deck, Boxall bumps into the gentleman who is already short of breath. Now there is something about the Titanic's carpenters that you should know. Now obviously excluding all the passengers who were carpenters, the Titanic carried 1 carpenter and 2 joiners in her crew. John Maxwell was the carpenter, and the joiner who worked under him was John Hall Hutchinson. And there was another joiner from the Harland and Wolff Guarantee Group who officially boarded as second-class passenger. His name was William Campbell. And later on in 1962, Boxall would identify this gentleman as the 29-year-old John Maxwell. The carpenter told Boxall, "Tell the captain, the ship's making water fast." Below the decks, the water has now reached 8 feet above the keel in boiler room number 6. Meanwhile, in the first-class dining salon, steward James Johnston sees Mr. Andrews hurriedly walking aft towards the pantry stairs to E deck. It is possible that he is headed to the engine room to speak with Chief Engineer Bell. At 11:52, lights in the stokeholes fail, plunging the men working there in complete darkness. Captain Smith is seen heading downwards towards the engine room. Boxall goes to G deck and sees the water is only about 2 feet from the top of the mail sorting room, aka the mail room. On D deck, a first-class passenger was unable to get out of his stateroom as the door was jammed because of the shift in the ship's superstructure. Jack Thayer, a first-class passenger, and his friend Richard Williams pass by, and Williams breaks the door, much to the dismay of a nearby steward who tells him, "This is White Star Line property. You will have to pay for it or go to jail once we get to New York." Bosun's mate Haynes hurries to the bridge to inform Officer Wilde he has seen more flooding. Wilde tells him to assemble his men and start preparing the lifeboats. At 11:55, Haynes goes to his men's quarters in the forecastle and tells them to get ready and come up to the boat deck. In the first class dining saloon, steward Johnstone sees Mr. Andrews return to tea deck from below, and then moves through the saloon again below towards the mail sorting room. This time he decides to follow him out of curiosity and sees the baggage room on G deck is flooding. Johnstone meets his co-worker, assistant second steward Joseph Wheat, and moves off to dress while Wheat watches the mail sorting room flood. At 11:57, bathroom steward Charles Mackay sees Captain Smith returning to the upper decks. Wilde orders quartermaster Oliver to find the boatswain and tell him to start preparing the lifeboats. At 12 a.m., the scheduled time change on the ship's clock is not carried out because, in words of Officer Pittman, we had other things to worry about. Boxhall returns from the mailroom and informs Captain Smith about the flooding, who then leaves the bridge. Boxhall is told to summon all the remaining officers, and Officer Moody tells Quartermaster Oliver to fetch the boat muster list, and the boatswain orders all hands to the lifeboats. At 12:05 a.m., Captain Smith is seen below, accompanied by Chief Purser McElroy and an unidentified mailroom clerk. They are headed towards the mailroom. At 12:10, stewardess Annie Robinson sees water up to E deck by the mailroom. She notices the captain and Mr. Andrews returning from the mailroom, and Mr. Andrews says, "Well, 3 have gone already, Captain," apparently referring to the 3 flooded cargo holds. 2 minutes later, Captain Smith returns to the bridge via the grand staircase, this time because survivors testified seeing him there. Stewardess Violet Jessop sees members of the orchestra of the ship beginning to assemble and head upstairs. Here, one of the musicians, Jock Hume, tells her that they are going to give them a tune to cheer things up. Around 12:15, Third Officer Pittman sees a group of firemen coming up with their kits from their quarters which have been flooded. He also sees water in cargo hold number 1 on G deck and then heads back to the boat deck. Quartermaster Hitchens hears Captain Smith telling the crew to swing out the lifeboats ready for lowering and start rousing passengers, and tell them to put on their life belts. Now, this is only a proactive measure on his part because he hasn't learned yet that the ship is sinking. He then goes to the Marconi room and tells the operators to prepare to send a CQD signal, but don't send it till they are told to do so. Now, I should also note here that the timing of the first distress signal is a bit debated. At 12:20, Mr. Murdoch tells Pittman to start preparing boat number 5. At the same time, word begins to spread that passengers should put on their life belts. Around 12:22, Mr. Andrews is seen at the grand staircase rushing towards the bridge. He does not stop to answer any questions, and survivors noted that he had the look of terror on his face. A few minutes later, Mr. Andrews meets Captain Smith, and their conversation likely happened on the bridge for the sake of privacy. Some people think it happened in Mr. Andrews' cabin, but bridge seems more likely. So Mr. Andrews tells him that the ship can stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded but not 5. And since the bulkheads don't go all the way to the top, as the ship goes down by the head, water will keep spilling over to the next compartments and so on. The pumps can buy you some time, but it's in minutes only. The only way forward is to seek help from nearby ships. In a sentence, Titanic will sink no matter whatever is done. And upon hearing this, Captain Smith asks him how much time they have. Mr. Andrews replies, an hour or an hour and a half at maximum. Now, it is believed that Mr. Andrews thought the Titanic would eventually capsize. However, this won't happen earlier because the list to port was corrected by the impact and water entering the ship on starboard side. And in fact, the Titanic remained on even keel most of the time during the sinking, most of the duration. Smith goes to the wireless room and tells them to start transmitting the CQD with the distress position he has provided, while Mr. Andrews moves into the first class entrance and begins going around passengers and tells them to put on their life belts. Eastbound steamer RMS Carpathia sends Titanic a message. Do you know Cape Cod is sending a bunch of messages for you? To which Titanic replies, come at once. We have struck a berg. It's a CQD, old man. Followed by the distress position. The operator, Harold Cottom, asks if he should inform his captain, to which Jack Phillips replies, yes, please do. Now the Carpathia is 58 miles away, and it will take them 4 hours to reach the Titanic. Cottom informs the Titanic. And then Phillips decides to send his assistant Harold Bright to inform the captain. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the entire transmission is actually available on YouTube, and I will leave a link to that in the description as well as in the community section to please check that out if you're interested in the whole transmission. At 12:37, Officer Boxhall comes into the wireless room with a revised distress position. This position was later found to be inaccurate once the wreck was found, and Phillips now begins transmitting the CQD signals with his new position. Here's a chart showing the differences between the distress positions given by Captain Smith and Boxhall, and for your reference, the position of the wreck is also marked. At 12:40, on the boat deck, the crew begins to prepare the lifeboats for boarding. Murdoch supervises the starboard assisted by Lowe and Pittman, while Lightoller supervises the portside boats assisted by Moody and Wild. There is something interesting about this event that you should know. Lightoller asked Captain Smith if they should begin loading with women and children first, to which the captain replied an affirmative. However, both sides followed a different interpretation of this. Lightoller on the port side did not allow any men, only the crewmen who were to row as well as Major Buchan, while Murdoch on the starboard side gave priority to women and children but allowed men to board as well if there was space and no women or children nearby. In fact, most of the men who survived owed their lives to Mr. Murdoch. On the port side, Officer Lightoller begins to prepare boat 4 for loading, and it is lowered to the promenade deck. He tells Moody and other crewmen nearby to start loading it with passengers once it becomes even with the rail. However, then they realize that the windows on the promenade deck are closed and they don't have the cranks to open them. A lot of time is wasted in looking for these cranks, and during this time many of the people waiting to board the boat just disperse to other areas. Lightoller decides not to wait and moves aft to boat 6 and prepares it for boarding. While on the starboard side, Officer Murdoch lowers the first lifeboat, boat 7. It has a capacity of 65 men and was tested with the weight of 70 men in Belfast, but it only carries 28 people. And that's because many people are reluctant to board the lifeboats as they don't realize the severity of the situation. Lookout George Alfred Hogg is placed in charge, and Lookout Archie Jewell and able seaman William Weller help with the rowing. And with this, the first hour of the sinking is complete.